It was getting dark outside, but Emily's mom still hadn't returned. Spinning the wheels of her chair, Emily rolled over to the table, picked up the phone, and dialed her mom's number. "The subscriber's device is switched off or out of service," an unfamiliar voice announced. Emily stared at the phone, confused. Remembering that there wasn't much money left on it, she turned it off. Mom had gone to the store but hadn't come back. That had never happened before. Her mom never stayed out for long because Emily, bound to her wheelchair since birth, couldn't walk. There were no other relatives to rely on. At 7 years old, Emily wasn't afraid to stay home alone, but her mom always told her where she was going and when she'd return. The little girl couldn't make sense of what was happening. She said she was going to the big store today. "It's farther, but the prices are better. We used to go there together. Even though it's farther, it only takes about an hour to get there and back," Emily thought, glancing at the clock. "But it's been 4 hours already, and I'm so hungry." She directed her wheelchair to the kitchen, warmed up the kettle, and took a meat patty out of the fridge. After eating and sipping her tea, she sat and waited. But there was still no sign of her mom. She finally gave in, picked up the phone again, and dialed the number. "The subscriber's device is switched off or out of service," the same robotic voice repeated. Frustrated, she wheeled herself to her bed, tucking the phone under her pillow. She didn't even turn off the light. Everything felt scarier without her mom around. She lay there for what seemed like hours before drifting off to sleep. When the sunlight peeked through the window, she woke up. Her mom's bed was neatly made. "Mom," she called toward the hallway. Silence answered. She grabbed the phone and tried calling again, but the same cold, metallic voice greeted her. Fear welled up, and tears streamed down her face. Meanwhile, Daniel was walking home from the cafe, carrying fresh pastries. Every morning began the same way. His mom prepared breakfast, and he went out to get warm rolls from their favorite spot. Daniel was already 30, but he had never married. Women barely noticed him. He was thin, pale, and often sickly. Illness had followed him since birth. His mom had done her best raising him alone, but they could never afford the expensive treatments he needed. His latest diagnosis had confirmed he wouldn't be able to have children, sealing his acceptance of a solitary life. As he walked, something glinted in the grass. A shattered phone, its casing crushed as if run over by a car and tossed aside. Daniel's curiosity piqued. Phones were both his profession and his hobby. A programmer and blogger by trade, he loved tinkering with gadgets. Slipping the broken device into his pocket, he thought, could be something interesting to look at later. After breakfast, he took out the phone and removed its SIM card, slotting it into one of his own devices. Most of the contacts were for medical facilities and government offices, but the first entry caught his eye. "Daughter." He hesitated briefly before dialing. "Mom," came a little girl's excited voice. I'm not your mom," Daniel stammered. "Where is she?" The voice wavered, trembling. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "I found a broken phone, swapped the SIM card, and called." "My mom's gone." The girl's words broke into sobs. "She left yesterday to go to the store and never came back." "Do you have a dad or grandparents?" Daniel asked, alarmed. "No, it's just me and Mom," she sniffled. "What's your name?" "Emily." "Hi, Emily. I'm Daniel. Listen, can you step outside and ask your neighbors for help?" "I can't walk," she replied softly. "I was born this way. Mom says we're saving up for an operation. Besides, the neighbors don't live next door. They moved out." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. "Wait, you can't walk? How do you get around?" "I have a wheelchair." "Emily, do you know your address?" he asked, switching to action mode. "Yes." "Okay, I'm coming over. We'll figure this out together." Hanging up, Daniel stood abruptly. His mother, Mrs. Carter, entered the room, noticing his agitation. "Daniel, what's wrong?" she asked. "I found a smashed phone. When I called one of the contacts, it turned out to belong to a little girl stuck alone in her apartment. She's disabled and has no family except her mom, who's missing. I got her address. I need to go help." Mrs. Carter grabbed her coat. "We're going together." Mrs. Carter had raised her son alone, and she knew firsthand how hard it was for a single mother with a sick child. Now retired, her son Daniel had grown up to earn a good living. They called for a taxi and headed to help the little girl. At the building, they buzzed the intercom. "Who's there?" Came a small, sorrowful voice. "Emily, it's me." "Come in." The door to the apartment was ajar when they arrived. Inside, a frail little girl in a wheelchair greeted them with sad eyes. "Will you find my mom?" she asked softly. "What's your mom's name?" Daniel asked immediately. "Lydia." "And her last name?" "Peterson." "Wait, Daniel," his mother interjected, turning to Emily. "Sweetheart, are you hungry?" The girl nodded. "I had a cutlet in the fridge, but I ate it yesterday." "All right, Daniel," Mrs. Carter instructed. "Go to the store we usually shop at and get the usual groceries." "Got it?" Daniel said as he dashed out the door. By the time he returned, Mrs. Carter had already whipped something up in the kitchen. She unpacked the bags, set the table, and ensured the child had a warm meal. After Emily ate, Daniel got to work finding her mother. He opened the city's local news website, scrolling through recent incidents. Here's something. On Lakeview Street, a driver struck a pedestrian. The victim was taken to the hospital in critical condition. He picked up his phone and began making calls. On the third attempt, someone answered, "Yes, we admitted a patient from Lakeview Street yesterday. She's in critical condition and hasn't regained consciousness yet." "What's her name?" "No ID or phone was found on her." "Are you a relative?" "I'm not sure yet." "Come to the hospital. Here's the address." "I know it. I'll be there shortly." Daniel hung up and approached Emily. "Do you have a picture of your mom?" "Yes," she replied, rolling her wheelchair toward a side table and retrieving a photo album. "Here's one we took recently." Daniel snapped a picture with his phone and smiled reassuringly. "I'm going to find your mom." Lydia slowly opened her eyes to a white ceiling. Consciousness crept back as fragments of a car accident flashed in her mind. She tried to move, but winced at the pain spreading through her body. A nurse approached. "You're awake?" she asked gently. Lydia's eyes widened in panic. "How long have I been here?" "2 days." "My daughter, she's alone at home," Lydia exclaimed, her voice trembling. "Calm down, Lydia," the nurse soothed, placing a reassuring hand on her chest. "A young man was here yesterday. He left his number for you." "Please, I need to call my daughter." "One moment." The nurse tapped the phone under daughter and held it to Lydia's ear. "Mom," Emily's voice cried out. "Emily, sweetheart, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. Mrs. Carter and Daniel are looking after me." "Who's Daniel?" Lydia asked, confused. The nurse stepped in. "Don't get worked up, or I'll have to take the phone away," she said firmly. Lydia promised to call back later and handed the phone over. The doctor came in for a checkup, giving the nurse instructions to start a drip. When he left, Lydia pleaded softly, "Could I talk to my daughter just a little longer?" Though hesitant, the nurse relented, handing the phone back. Emily's voice came through again, bright and full of hope. "Mom, don't worry, just get better." Lydia clung to her daughter's words like a lifeline. The following evening, during visiting hours, Lydia was surprised when a lanky young man entered her room. "Hi, Lydia. I'm Daniel," he said with an easy smile. "Hope you don't mind me calling you by your first name." "Not at all," she replied, puzzled. Daniel placed a large bag on the bedside table. "This is from my mom for you." Lydia was overwhelmed. "I don't even know who you are," she murmured. "I found your crushed phone by chance," Daniel explained. "The SIM card still worked, so I called your daughter. Then I tracked you down." "How's Emily?" Lydia asked urgently. Daniel handed her a phone, one he had brought during his first visit. "Here, you can talk to her yourself." Lydia stared at the screen, her heart swelling as her daughter's face appeared. "Mom, does it hurt?" "No, sweetie, not anymore. How are you?" "Mrs. Carter comes to visit me all the time," Emily replied. Lydia spoke with her daughter for a long time while Daniel waited patiently. After the call, she turned to him, her voice thick with gratitude. "I owe you everything." "Don't mention it," Daniel said with a grin. "And hey, call me Daniel." Weeks passed. The driver responsible for the accident brought Lydia compensation of $10,000 and a lawyer to finalize the settlement. The next day, Lydia was discharged. Daniel arrived to pick her up and brought her home. "Mom." Emily's joyful voice rang out as she leaned forward in her wheelchair, ready to leap out if she could. Lydia knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her daughter, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Then, turning toward the elderly woman nearby, she said with heartfelt gratitude, "Mrs. Carter, I can't thank you enough." Mrs. Carter waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Lydia, think nothing of it. Emily feels like my own granddaughter now." Lydia hesitated, pulling a small envelope from her purse. "But I must insist. The man responsible for the accident gave me this settlement. Please take it. It's the least I can do. Mrs. Carter's tone turned firm. Put that away, Lydia. My son and I won't starve without it, but you need every penny to help Emily heal. Daniel's already arranged everything with a clinic. Mom, Emily exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. Uncle Daniel said we're going to the hospital soon and they'll help me walk again. The weeks that followed were filled with long days at the clinic. Emily underwent her first surgery, where metal rods were carefully placed to support her legs. 2 weeks passed before they returned home, only to prepare for more trips back in the months to come. Doctors predicted it would take 3 years, 3 surgeries, and extensive rehabilitation, but Emily would walk again. In the meantime, the rods caused discomfort, and Emily remained in her wheelchair. Life wasn't about to make things easier. Mrs. Carter suffered a severe heart episode and was hospitalized in critical condition. For 3 nights, Lydia stayed by her side at the hospital, catching only brief naps when she went home to prepare meals for everyone. At night, Daniel took over, staying with Emily and keeping her spirits high. On the 4th day, Mrs. Carter finally opened her eyes fully, her gaze resting lovingly on Lydia. After a long silence, she whispered, Lydia, my dear, I don't think I have much time left in this world. You need to marry my Daniel. He's a good man, steady and kind. Together, you will raise Emily and help her thrive. Lydia shook her head, her voice barely audible. Do you think he'd want me? Mrs. Carter's lips curled into a faint smile. He will. Trust me, he will. Years passed, and the promise of hope fulfilled itself. On a crisp autumn morning, Mrs. Carter held Emily's hand as they walked toward a school building. Emily carried a backpack and a bouquet of flowers, her tall frame a clear sign she was older than most first-time students. Grandma, she murmured, her voice tinged with nerves, I'm a little scared. Mrs. Carter squeezed her hand gently. What's there to be scared of? You're 10 years old. Look, here come your mom and dad. Lydia rushed over, brushing a stray hair from Emily's face. Sweetheart, why the long face? She asked softly. Mrs. Carter chuckled. She's nervous about her first day at school. Daniel crouched down and extended his hand to Emily. Come on, kiddo. Take my hand. We'll walk in together. Emily slipped her small hand into his, her face lighting up with a smile. With you, Dad, I'm not scared at all. The little family, chatting and laughing, strolled toward the school entrance, with Lydia and Mrs. Carter following close behind, their happiness mirrored in their every step. That's how the story ends, friends. Join the conversation below and share your thoughts on this story. If you found it captivating, share the link with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story that will make your heart race. Your support inspires us to create more tales. Take care and see you next time.